It's a new meeting with. Welcome everybody to The High Note. I'm going to be interviewing Art Leiby today, and we're going to explore his story and his journey through his musical experience. So welcome, Art. I appreciate you being here and taking the time with me today. I'm going to be looking back and forth between our audience over here and you over here. So bear with me if I'm looking around at various things. So we've had an adventurous day so far. We participated in the Composer Exchange, or Harmony Chat. You had a wonderful cue you shared. But I want to start off, if you don't mind, with getting into how you got into music. I mean, you're of age. You've been through a few experiences, and this is a lot of what I'd like to find out about. How did it all begin for you in your inspiration for music? Where did it all start, and how did it evolve?
Well, I'll try to give you an abridged version because I don't want this to take up the whole interview. But basically, I started as most kids do, in like when I was in third grade, I started piano. And, I quit after like 3 months. My mom was teaching me, and so she was a pianist. And then about 3 months later, I came back and I said, I want to try again. So we tried again. And then about a year later, I got a teacher, a regular teacher. And then I continued to play piano. And then seventh grade, I started playing trombone. And then, of course, I'd go to high school and I continued to play trombone and piano. And I studied piano all the way until I was a sophomore in college, I believe. And so then I went off to college and undergraduate in Bachelor of Music and Bachelor of Music Education at a school in Philadelphia called Philadelphia University of the Arts, it's called now. And so I got a music education degree and also a performance degree in trombone. And then I taught, I was thinking about going to grad school, but I decided not to. And I taught in parochial schools or Catholic schools for about 3 years, actually 5 years. And meanwhile, I was saving up money to go to graduate school. And then I went to University of Miami in 1985 through 1987, got my master's in studio jazz writing. And then when I came back, I worked for a music publisher for about 9 months. And I learned a lot, but it didn't pay hardly anything. And it wasn't any future that I saw in it. So I got a job in a public school. And I taught there for the next 30 years in elementary instrumental music. In the meantime, I was playing all over the place, down in Atlantic City and around the area, in Philadelphia area, doing all kinds of things, salsa gigs and, weddings and typical stuff, and down the casinos and the showrooms and whatever. And then, and I also started a small publishing company, which publishes music for low brass. I did 2 books that I put out, and then I started writing for brass quintets and brass quartets and trombone quartets and tuba quartets. So
let me just, for the folks listening here, just to clarify, your main instrument then is trombone, correct?
Well, yes,
a variety of horns, didn't you?
It was originally trombone, but I branched out and I play bass trombone, euphonium, which is like a baritone horn, and tuba now. But now that I'm having a harder time getting around and schlepping, I play tuba in a group still, and I play trombone around some, but not nearly as much as I used to. And so, yeah, and bass trombone for shows and things like that, But yeah, so that's kind of my life in a nutshell. And then I retired in 2016 from public school education. And since then, I've been taking a journey into composition. And that's, of course, a lifelong journey. And so I've been getting, and then I'm, met you guys and whatever, and kind of where I'm at.
Well, so the you guys is folks through the cinematic composer
composing
group, and which has evolved into a whole community of people that's encompassing of more than just cinematic composing, other programs, introductions. It's kind of a referral network or invitation only group that we have over at the Composer Exchange. And I'd like to, step back to a couple things. First, my first question about you were talking about your education,
right?
And you mentioned studio jazz, and tell me a little bit about what is that degree? What got you excited about that, and what is studio jazz in the context of that program?
Well, that sort of encompasses a lot, but basically, it's writing for studio orchestra, jingles. We wrote for like a jazz vocal group, so things that would be handled in a recording situation. Of course, this was back in writing for film to some extent. Of course, this was back in the 80s, so technology was completely different than it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, we were at the tail end of doing things with formulas, to figure out where hits were going to be and that kind of thing. So it's hard to relate to in this generation because, with Symphony coming in and towards the end of we were in that transition period before Symphony really came into being and before analog went to digital and everything. So I grew up in an analog world, and I sort of incorporated the digital world into into things you have to. I mean, it's just the way it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, for folks that are kind of new to this concept, and I did some work in the same space around that same time. Explain what you meant by formulas.
Well, there's a famous book by Earl Hagen that came out in, I believe, the early 1960s, and he codified writing for film pretty much because it was sort of the Bible in the 60s, and you had to figure out what the time signature was and how many beats were in each measure and whatever. And then use a formula to figure out where, if you wanted to hit, especially if you're doing, Mickey Mousing for animated music, if you wanted to hit at a certain point, you had to use this formula to figure out where that hit was going to be.
Yeah, and what beat? You're basically you're doing the math
for
a composition, which is say a minute piece or 2 minute, whatever it is, the length of it. You map that out and you go, okay, you might have to change a time signature.
Correct.
So that you can come in to hit a click. That's a lot of the same stuff that we're doing in a DAW when we're scoring the picture, which is it's a similar process. It's just we have a little help from our calculator on steroids, if you will.
And Symphony time code, which was the big thing that made that happen,
Absolutely.
So actually you would take the score and you would do all the calculations and everything and put them in the score so you know exactly what you had to hit and where it was going to be. So of course you had to make the music happen just like in a DAW, where you put the markers in and you say, okay, well, this is what I want here, same kind of thing, except you had to do it manually. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank God for the DAW and the like Dorico and some of these other scoring tools, because I remember a gig I got when I was right out of college, being not a transcriber, but what's the for writing out the writing out the part. Copyist, thank you. And because all the terms are different now, but anyways, a copyist. The poor people that had to read my handwriting, it was horrible.
Well, that's a whole different art. I mean, mine was not great either, but I had the pens and all, and all the ink and everything. It was, but I was better with pencil. That's a
Yeah,
whole art in
because
itself.
you could erase.
Yeah, but it's not only that. It's you got first of all you got to be fast. You got
Yeah,
to be fast
that,
to make any
that
kind
was
of
not
money.
me. I was not,
Yeah.
that was the thing. So you spent some time, you said, as a publisher,
Well,
which is another business that's changed a lot. Uh,
right.
Tell me what you did in that world. You wrote a couple books. You were working on publications for brass ensembles, or what was it? What exactly was
So
it we're doing?
I in the after came out of graduate school, I worked for a music publisher, and I was more or less an editor and copyist and proofreader and everything, all in one. And basically, when I wasn't writing, I would be looking at things that were about to be published, finding mistakes and fixing them manually with like whiteout and you know uh, all that stuff. And it was tedious, but I'll tell you the most tedious thing I had to do. The first day I started working for this guy, um, he had a music typewriter there. And I'd never used a music typewriter, and I think he did it strategically. It was a very good strategic move. He only made me work with it for one day, thank God. But basically, you had this like tape measure kind of thing that you would put across the paper, and you had to figure out where the allotment was for each beat in the music because everything had to be allotted correctly. So a quarter note takes up a quarter of the measure, an eighth note takes up an eighth of a measure. So you had to put these marks with a blue pencil all the way across the score or across the music. Then you put the music in the typewriter and you tediously lined up the blue pencil with the note and typed in the notes. I guess
Wow.
if we'd done it longer, I would have appreciated it more, but it was torture, really.
I mean, this is like to all you kids out there, you young folks coming into the music world, you got it good. Because that's the kind of stuff that's a pain in the rear that you don't even, you know.
Well, it's interesting because, like we both grew up in an era when we were transitioning from analog to digital. And, when I was working with Finale at home and whatever, but he was still doing everything, pen and then copying and, putting it out that way. He was older and, it was old school. So he only believed one way, but he did have an assistant who was there who sort of guided him into the digital world. So by the my time of my end of my time there, he was heading towards working without way, which is the way we all work now. And
Absolutely.
I have a small publishing company that I run from my home. Like I said, I had two books, one called Rochu for Two and Rochu for Two Two, which are accompaniment parts to famous trombone etudes that I put out 2002, I think. And I'm still selling them. In fact, I got to put out an order for some of them. Not major amounts, but, maybe 20, 30 a year. It's a niche market. And then I have, stuff that tuba quartets and stuff that Hickey's out of New York sells. And I have a lot on Sheet Music Plus now because there's no need for paper anymore.
Oh yeah.
So it's like
Just click a
everybody
button.
downloads. So, and it's really easy because once it's up there, you get a notice from them saying, "Oh, you sold 4 copies of this or whatever."
Oh
And
neat.
okay, every once in a while you get a check in the mail for $20 or whatever. It's not anything that's going to keep me rich, get me rich, that's for sure.
It's not going to take you, it might buy you a coffee or lunch
Right.
someplace, but it's not going to take you on a cruise around the world.
Now, I think, well, I think for things that are in public domain and you've done arrangements of or whatever you get, or an original composition, I think you get 40%. And then for anything they're paying the rights for, because they pay the rights for it. If you do an arrangement of that, I think you get like 10% or something like that. But
Mhm.
it all depends. what you want with it. I have a tuba quartet, so I wrote it from my group, write it from my group, and then I say, I'll put it out there in the world. If anybody wants it, here it is, so that's fine.
Now you'll produce those in is it Finale you work with?
I use Finale, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so
I'm old school.
that's okay. I mean, I
Well,
remember when that came out, I was like so fascinated. It's like, this is so cool, because I had been writing it by hand, but I wasn't a good enough I wasn't a good enough reader to be able to fully utilize it.
right. I remember when I was in grad school and I'd sit, in the dorms at a table, and I'd have the score and I'd be copying out parts till like 5 in the morning because it had to be performed the next day. And one of my roommates said to me, he said, "Isn't there a faster way to do that?" And I said, "There will be a
There
year
you
or
go.
so, but
Art,
not right now."
you predicted the future, and it's
Well,
here.
I mean, you saw it. Everybody saw it. It's just a matter of, catching up. So, yeah.
Well, that'll be some of my questions a little bit later on, because there's a lot going on in the world of music and artificial intelligence and so forth. And we want to kind of touch on that and get your predictions with that coming up. So as you were, growing up and finding an interest in music, what was the pivotal moment that said, hey, I want to become a musician? This is what I want to do as a profession. What inspired you, or who inspired you, if there was somebody that had a memorable impression upon you?
I don't remember I don't think it was the person who had a memorable impression on me, because he was mediocre at best. But my band director in junior high school, actually in 7th grade, that was when I decided I wanted to be a music educator. And it's weird because that's what I did my whole entire life. But to decide that at that time is unusual. I don't know why. I mean, I always just loved, anything music. But I don't know why I felt like I wanted to be an educator, because when I went to school, it was like everybody wanted to play for a living. Of course, you don't realize the realities of it until you get out of school. But I wanted to teach, and that's what I always wanted to do. So that's what I wound up doing. So yeah, and of course I love to play, and I love to, I love to perform, and I've done it all my life. But that's not what I wanted to do for my career.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because teaching takes a real special amount of patience. I know that. I mean, I was one of those that wanted to be a player, and I always felt, well, I don't have the patience, and I didn't have, I felt like I didn't have something to teach. I mean, I could have gone to school and get trained on the various processes and the academic aspects of it. But what is it about teaching that really got you excited? I mean, there's certainly a different reward system, because your audience is different. You go as a gig, wow, you're really cool. Oh yeah, that's a different kind of recognition or feeling that you get than, wow, I really had an impression on this young person's life, and that's a cool thing. Kind of like Dr. Holland's Opus, or what was that?
Mr. Holland's Opus.
Mr. Holland's Opus. That was a beautiful movie, by the way. But what was it that you got the most out of teaching, and what kept you driven?
Well, it's certainly not the financial rewards. It's much better than it was even 20 years ago. But it's still not that as the main objective. What I've always loved about teaching is just watching light bulbs go on and watching growth. You see, yes, you'll have one student a year maybe who really excels and decides to go into music as a career, which I've had probably about 30 or 40 in my career. But that's not really, that is rewarding, but it's not necessarily the immediate reward. the immediate reward is to see the light bulb go on, and to see the progress, and from week to week and from month to month. And people always say to me, how could you listen to that, that noise in the beginning, and you say, well, I just listen to it with different ears. When I go to the professional orchestra, I don't listen to them with the same ears that I do when I'm working with a fourth grader, So it's all about the journey, and about the,
And
watching
music,
growth.
yeah, music has such an impact. It isn't, and it was a realization for me, because I used to be a little bit of a purist in my earlier days, but it's about the impact that it has on your soul, on a person. I mean, when you look at science, the smallest little quark is essentially a vibration. I mean, everything around us ties back to music and vibrations, and so this whole concept of music is, it has such a larger impact on people than just that, hey, I'm going to go be a rock star. Well, okay, good for you. There's so much more. Which is kind of one of the things I learned taking a break from music, and then going, well, hey, I have to be a normal person. I mean, I have to be, I'm not just a musician. I'm like me. And that space allowed me to really tune in at a different level, to be able to understand, what, the music is really something special, but it's also part of you. I mean, you're coming back now, in your retirement, like many people do. They come in and go, well, hey, this is who I am. This is my world, and what really makes me happy. I don't have to do these other things for a living. In your case, it was still related to music and it was teaching, but now you're really discovering your art. You're really, no pun intended, but you're really discovering your creative skills and niche, because the work that you're doing is really beautiful, and it's really deep. It's not just, oh, I can write a pop tune, or I can write a string quartet thing. You're really stretching a gamut of a variety of styles. What is like your signature piece? What is the piece that you've created, in what style and genre, that you're the most proud of? Because I know you've done so many different styles, because we work with that, on a weekly basis, over in the Composer Exchange. But what is that one signature piece that you did that's like, that's all me, and I'm really proud of it?
I think probably, if I had to answer that question, it would be something outside of my general comfort zone. I wrote a piece for a class that I'm taking with Christoph von Hall, and it was based on Sibelius' symphony, and it was not necessarily tonal. It was tonal, but it was not chord based. It was simultaneity based. So it was all about the lines, and how the lines interacted, and what the harmonies were that created in that instant. And I think that came off the most successful of all my pieces. Although I tend to like write a piece and then forget about it. I that's just who I am. Like, I very rarely go back to a piece and change it, or there may be a few things that I might tweak. For instance, both of us are working on a piece for the Berlin Film Festival, or film scoring competition, and I'm working with that with my teacher to try to make it better, So, but very rarely will I do that. Once I sort of do the piece, it's like, okay, I've done that. Now let's move on to something else. But as far as thinking back, because I've only really been composing for, I would say, 3 years, because I always considered myself an arranger, so Yeah, I composed these accompaniment parts for this trombone book, but it wasn't really composing because it was a line that worked with another line that was already there. So I didn't start from ground zero. Um, but I'm not a great composer, but I feel more comfortable now doing something that's starting from ground zero and feeling like I can actually do it, which I probably could have before, but I didn't feel comfortable doing it. And of course, with DAWs now, it's like you get immediate reinforcement.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
If it's wrong, you're going to know it right away.
Yeah, you don't have to go have some guy in the third chair go, well, hey, I think this is a wrong note here. And then you look, yeah, that's it. That takes forever. It's a forever
Although,
process.
although I will do things in the DAW sometimes, and then I don't tend to transport things into notation. I tend to put them in manually. I don't know why, but I do. And then sometimes you say, that doesn't quite work right, does it? So I think Tony called it the great sterilizer notation software, because you
Yeah.
realize that things you may not have heard or it sounded okay were actually not.
Well, and so for the folks that don't do this a lot, if you are going from a MIDI space, right, you're going to play a note and then you're going to play the next note and then play the next note. Well, it's just as important to have the end of the note right and quantized as it is the beginning of the note, because that's going to make for a weird looking piece of spaghetti when it comes to the notation software.
And it's for those people that don't know about this, that process is called MIDI cleanup. And there are actually people who do this for a living. They take MIDI files and they clean them up so that all the attacks are there, all the releases are there, so they can dump it into notation software.
That's a career of the future, right?
Well, it is the career of now. I mean,
yeah, well, yeah.
Everybody uses people to do that. That's sort of like the menial task, I guess, when they bring you in as an apprentice, you MIDI cleanup. So it's necessary.
Now, in your process, do you ever, so I'll give you an example. Some things that I try to do, they come really easy and they go boom. And the other things I'm working on it and I call, I use this term with my wife. I say, well, I'm putting lipstick on a pig, and I'm like, I'm going to stick with this until I get it right. And the beauty is that you can change it enough that, and come up with something. Sometimes, I mean, it's the difference of working on a piece for a day. Okay, I got it. And it works great. Other times it's like 3 days and you're going, whoa, would this ever get right? You usually come up with a pretty good piece because you've been spending so much time with it. But do you find that you have different things that you're doing that come a little easier than others versus, being stuck in that, oh, well, I got to finish this because I don't want to just let it go until it's done right. Do you ever get into that kind of a workflow situation or notice the difference between styles that are easier for you than others?
Of course, and usually when it's easy or when it's comfortable or when the creativity is really bubbling, it happens fast. It just comes out and it's right. When it's not, it's probably sometimes it takes longer and it does work, but a lot of times it's like you're trying to fit it just you get done it, but it's like it's okay. At least that's what I feel. Sometimes it doesn't come right away or it doesn't come fast and it turns out fine. But a lot of times when I'm struggling with something unless all of a sudden along the way a little light bulb goes off and you say, now I get it, and you go from there, and it's fairly quickly at that point. But if you're struggling all the way through the piece, probably in my experience, it's not going to turn out that great. It'll be okay, but it is what it is, you know?
Now, if I recall, you're working in Logic.
Yes, yes.
So Logic and Finale, and you've done a little bit in Sibelius.
Not really. I've looked at Dorico, and you know, these notation softwares, especially Finale, because of when it was written and because of the coding, and there's only so much they can change, is probably the most challenging software out there right now, notation software.
Mm-hmm.
So they're, you know, Sibelius is great, but it's different a little bit, and it's a little bit easier, I think. I'm not sure. Dorico is wonderful, but I spent a long time, well, 40 years learning Finale, and for me to switch to something else is like really unnecessary, you know.
Yeah,
um
if you're skilled at it,
right.
you might as well.
Although Dorico has so much to offer. If I were starting out with this now, that's what I would go with, because I mean, it's the potential is, you know.
Yeah, I think that Doroco is really going to be the future
Of course, yes,
approach, because they've really
I agree.
connected it with a DAW. It's not just notation software. It's a DAW essentially. A little interesting to try and get used to if you're used to a DAW. But it's a wonderful combination of what they're doing. They're really going in the right direction, and I'm really, speaking of the future, I really am curious to see what they come up with as that product line evolves, because it's a really fascinating connection between Steinberg's Cubase and Dorico, which that's
It
my
was
platform. I like them both.
it was interesting when you did your presentation last week. I saw this flow up there, flow one, flow two, and I'm thinking, what in the world is flow one, flow two? And then I said, oh, he was using Dorico. That's how that works. You know, it's in it's a completely different environment than Sibelius or Finale, and
Yeah.
it really takes a completely different mindset to
Yeah,
work.
that you have, like anything, you have, and there's so much to learn in this world. We have these different layers of things. So we have the palette, okay, like our choice of instruments. We have the arrangement. We have whether it's going to be played live or whether it's going to be in the box, and how we engineer it. And there's all these elements that go into composition that most people don't think about. But yeah, one of the things.
Nowadays, a composer has to be everything. A producer,
Yeah, that's
everything.
uh including your MIDI cleanup guy. You got to, it's the buck stops. So that there's so much more to learn. The you know you use the term nowadays, and we've both had kind of previous careers and then what we're doing now. And we've had the privilege of seeing how the industry has evolved and changed. And how do you see this industry changing and evolving in the future? From what you've seen, but then, we've, in some of our other conversations, we've talked about artificial intelligence and some of the tools that are out there. But having looked at all this and being somewhat familiar with our process and the variety of processes of how it's evolved from having to have a pen and paper versus now these new tools with a DAW versus artificial intelligence helping to generate it. You sing into a microphone and it'll write out your parts. What do you think is gonna happen with all of that?
It's difficult, really, to say, and I don't want to sound like the old guy, get off my grass, kids, because when this first started coming in, it was like garbage in, garbage out. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, it's not going to matter. But it's gotten to the point where if you don't know what you're doing, it doesn't matter, because you
Yeah,
can use all the tools that are out there, and you don't need to know what you're doing. So I don't know. I really don't. And with artificial intelligence, as you say, and as it progresses, I don't know. It's going to be a different set of tools. So the
yeah,
tools
and
that
skills.
the tools that I had or grew up with and learned are not necessarily going to be the tools of the future. So that's the only thing that I can say. It's going to be a different set of skills, a different set of tools, even than now. Yeah.
Yeah, and we look at our devices, and I'm seeing folks be able to create amazing things on iPads and phones that, I mean, I never could have imagined that would be a skill set to be able to do. Um, as artificial intelligence connects with, being able to take it from just singing it in, or, tapping it out, hey Siri, and it's making a piece of music for you. That'll be really interesting to see how that evolves. And
Well, it already has affected, you know, the performer musician in a negative way, if you look at it that way. I mean, because obviously there's a lot less live recording and a lot less and a lot more in the box, a lot more. It's even in not in AAA movies, but in TV and whatever. There's a lot less recording of real live musicians because it's it almost sounds as good, and the people don't know and they don't care, and the producer doesn't know and he doesn't care, and the director might know but he may not care either. It's all about the bottom line. So, not to get too negative, but that
yeah,
seems the direction it's going.
I agree. I think that there's going to be some challenges as far as, you know professional opportunities. I think that it's going to be a narrower group. I think, for example, we have classical music has survived all of the transitions. It's still here. It's still strong. It's still worth going and hearing a live orchestra. Okay. There are fewer of them, certainly. I think jazz is kind of in that same kind of category. There's, spin-offs of different kinds of you know, interpretations of the art forms and so forth. But I think there's going to still be a need for a human to perform live and have people go and experience that live performance. I think there's always going to be uh, something special about the uniquely human aspects of it. But as far as, how that changes in the industry as a whole, I think you're right. The tools are going to change, and there's going to be a lot of surprises. And I think it will, as it's going to affect many other industries. I think it's certainly going to have an effect on the music business. Um, Now you've been involving a majority of your time in kind of the cinematic composition space. You've been taking a lot of classes and connecting with networking with a lot of people, and kind of pulling information in. And uh, do you think your passion for learning comes from being an educator, or is it with a fascination for oh wow, I could do this or I could do that? Do you find more inspiration from being a teacher, having an interest in this journey of being a composer, or is that just kind of all on its own by the fascination of how much there is to learn? Like you said, we have to learn how to do everything as a composer.
Um, I don't think it has to do with the fact that I was a teacher. I do feel that it has to do with the fact that I'm pretty much a lifelong learner kind of philosophy guy, and if the more you know, the more you know you don't know.
Yeah.
So you look at you check out something and you say, "Oh, I know that. Well, I don't know that. What's that? Then you go find out what that is, and that brings up more that you don't know. And so it's a constant search for knowledge and experience. And the other thing is, I guess I was a frustrated. I mean, if I am not at all sorry for choices that I made in my life, but would I have loved to have been a composer in Hollywood and and make a living that way? Sure, yeah, everybody would probably. So this is sort of like a voyeur kind of way of doing things that were impossible 10 years ago, even 20 years ago at the least. I remember, as we've talked about before, when I was in college and undergraduate school, there was no such thing as digital recording. So, everything was to tape. And I had a 4-track recorder. And if I wanted to do a piece that I'd written to hear it, I would have to do record and then bounce it to the track and then record another track and bounce. By the time you got done, it sounded like mud because every generation added more noise and more big bass. But that was the only way to do it. And so, what we live in now is just absolutely, it's like a candy store. It's like, and now does it sound exactly like that instrument? No, not quite. But that's sort of the art of doing it too, is to make it sound as close as you can. And
Yeah, it's learning the vocabulary of our libraries. Like we were talking today in our Harmony chat session, we were talking about guitar libraries and horn libraries to try and emulate a specific style of playing and performance. Well, I know I struggle with it, and everybody seemed to have their own struggle with some aspect of what they were trying to communicate, and that's what it comes down to. These taking that time to go through that, there's no shortcut for it. You just have to go, oh, I know what library to go to for this sound and that sound. It's building your vocabulary, of understanding all these various libraries, and that's
as
wow,
much as you think, and as much as you think a trumpet library sounds like any other trumpet library, they're all different, and they all have a particular sound, and they all work in a particular situation. We were doing this piece that was like called for like a horn section, and that has a unique sound that's not orchestral, and it's not exactly studio. It's more compact, it's more close mic'd, and in your face, and a very punchy condensed sound. And there's very few good libraries that are out there that to give you that, and the ones that are a bit limited. So those are the kind of things that we have to deal with.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, I mean, you shared with me. In fact, I hope you'll share that link with me again so that I can put it in the comments for this interview. You shared with me some kind of funky horns you put together behind a guy that had this incredible group. It was I think a church group, and it was wow, it was just fantastic. But one of the things, and this is kind of a rule that we know about as composers, that if you can inject one live instrument with the other, in the box instruments from music libraries, it makes all the difference in the world. It could be a guitar, it could be a saxophone or a trumpet or a bass, any an acoustic piano, something that has that ambience of being a live performed instrument by a real musician. It brings the whole production of what you're doing to a whole new universe. And I don't necessarily know what that is. It's like the magic trick
Well,
to having something really sound authentic or real.
in that particular situation, it called for the same kind of thing as we were doing in our group today. Called for a small group horn section, nice and punchy and nice and, and I tried probably 4 or 5 different libraries to try to make it work. And I kept sending them to the guy, and he said, it's not quite right. I said, I know. I said, I just, and so he recorded a live trumpet over top of it, and it just made all the
Oh,
difference in the world, you know?
fantastic.
Yeah.
I, I was at the taxi convention in LA a couple weeks ago, and they played a bunch of people's cues over this big PA system, and it's kind of a cool thing. And one of the cues that came out that they played with this lady is like live violin, and wow, what a difference it made. You know, I have a lot of string sounds that sound like that, but you can't hide a live performance, and that's that. When we come back to the artificial intelligence, I think it's going to be really difficult and perhaps a really long time before we can really pull that real humanized element, because music is an expression of our emotions. It's our feelings, and pulling those feelings out into the music. And you can't always get that when you're quantizing MIDI to be able to write out parts, or even if you don't quantize exactly, it still doesn't quite have the same flow, or the same it doesn't pull out the emotions quite like a human performance.
Well, like you said, there are certain types of, of music that don't translate well to MIDI, that you really do need live performance for. Especially like when you try to do things rubato or out of time, or try to make it sound natural and flowing. It's really hard. It really is. I thought Mike did a good job at that, which is a hard line to follow.
Yeah, there were a lot of really great pieces that were shared today in that session. Now, as you think about this journey that you're on, where do you see yourself going in the next 5 years? You have talked a lot about, hey, I just like to create a piece and move on, and I'm not really that ambitious for the business side or the fame or the fortune. But you're going in a direction, and you're learning, and you're creating some fantastic music in a variety of different styles. Tell me about the direction that you have going forward, and how you're going to push your music out there in some kind of a legacy, or connect it to your, I want to say it was your dream that you're coming back to fulfill, writing music for Hollywood. How is it that you'll connect with that? Tell me about where you're going on your path and your journey forward.
Well, I know the answer that you think I'm going to give, and probably is the answer I'm going to give. I really don't care about a legacy or making money with monetizing it. I love, similar to teaching, I love taking an embryo or an idea and seeing it become something. And hopefully I will get better at it. And so that's really where I'm going with it. I go from here, and I want to get to there, only with experience and knowledge. I mean, I think about, like I said, I've only been doing with this for 3 years or so, and I had no clue the journey I was going on. And so I don't know where I'll be in the next 5 years, but hopefully better than I am today. As far as monetizing or a legacy or anything, that doesn't really, I don't necessarily, it's not that I don't care, it's just that it's not my priority. It's just becoming better all the time at what I do. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly the best place to start. We're here as creators, we're trying to create, and you have a true authenticity in your passion for wanting to create great music and get better at it as a person and composer and creative spirit. I think that's very humble of you, and it's a great place for people to appreciate and take as an inspiration. So related to inspiration, I first want to ask you who inspires you the most, and then I'm going to ask you a follow-up question about how you may be able to inspire others. So who inspires you the most?
Are you talking professional musicians? Are you talking in a field? Are you talking
Oh my gosh, you opened Pandora's box. Well, that's a good question.
because I mean, there are a lot of musicians that inspire
Yeah,
me.
so let's take three things: musicians, composers, and people that are just cool thinkers in the world.
Well, I was highly inspired and probably influenced by Chick Corea. And he was sort of I mean, I had during the 70s and 80s, I had all his albums. And I was just amazed that he could do so many different things in so many different genres and do it so well. And it was amazing to me. And so I would say, as far as a musician and a composer, he was probably the most influential that way. Um, as far as a teacher, um, I've had several great teachers, and they were all inspiring. And that my teacher now is probably as inspiring as any, which is William Holshaw. Um, and he's not only inspiring as a musician and as a composer, but as an artist and as a writer. And it's just scary, the talent that he has. As far as performer, just a straight performer, I would say Yo-Yo Ma, because he makes so much music with a single instrument and does it. It's just so just it makes you feel. It makes you feel. And yeah, I guess that comes from the fact that I'm a low brass player, and it's sort of like that 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 range of frequency that I can relate to, but it's more than that. So yeah, I would say Yo-Yo Ma.
How about just outside of music? Who inspires you the most? Could politics or religion or wherever, hopefully it doesn't have to be either of those two, but in whatever category, who's a forward thought leader that you go, wow, the Dalai Lama? Who is it that jumps out to you as somebody that you go, that's pretty important, interesting?
I mean, I could give you an answer, but Obama would be one of them. And of course, anybody from the history, Nelson Mandela, uh, Martin Luther King, um, so if you're talking history, but I would say now probably someone like Obama, or who thinks at a higher plane, who is not just thinking about today, but tomorrow.
Yeah, somebody that's not thinking about just themselves too.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
has a broader, want to do something for the world
Right.
Well, good choice. Now, if you were going to have a recommendation or something that you would share with, people that might stumble across this on YouTube, what advice would you give younger musicians or people aspiring to grow their skills and craft and connections in being a cinematic composer and perhaps an all-around good musician?
It takes a lifetime. It really does. There's no easy fixes or formulas or easy tricks. Anybody that tells you there are they may be an easy trick, but it's not going to be anything that lasts for any period of time. So figure out what you want to do and how you want to get there, and just go for it. But it does take a lifetime. That doesn't mean you can't be successful within a lifetime, but if you really want to learn everything about what you want to do, yeah, it takes a lifetime.
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey. And speaking of the journeys, I really appreciate you exploring this journey and having this conversation. Uh, is there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the folks that we might talk to here, other than, do the work and enjoy the journey over a long period of time?
That's what it is. It's about the journey. It's not about the destination.
There you go. Well, thank you, Art, for your time and your gift of music to the world, and sharing this with all of us. And thank you for your service in helping all of these young folks that you had to listen to with different ears over the period of
Not just young folks. I have a couple of adult saxophone students that are beginners.
Well, the hardest thing to listen to is anyone starting a new instrument. That's a challenge. But I appreciate your patience in taking the time to help inspire people to pull that out of their pull their creative inspirations out to get more enjoyment out of music and so forth. So thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for taking a peek. This is our first episode of our debut interview for The High Note. And with that, I want to especially thank Slack and Piebox for being sponsors to help with the Composer Exchange and our community of composers. And with that, I'd like to say, end on a high note. Be sharp. Thank you. Take care. Bye, Art.